The. Can I, what is it? Legally rename myself The? Is that allowed? Isn't there something about, there's some other business in town that goes by The, isn't there? Oh, I don't think so. We will roll the tide. We did roll the tide the last time we played them. So, no, let's roll tide. All right. Welcome, everybody. So our church values different streams of Christianity. And it's common for us to draw from some of those different streams. And we're going to do something this year along those lines. We're going to draw from the Catholic and Orthodox traditions in something that are called feast days. Feast days. It's an opportunity to celebrate the life of a Christian or a saint from the past and remember them and what they stood for. And we want to align our feast days with the Life Church ethos. You know, many of you have seen the videos or you've participated in the sermons or out here on the wall. You know, it says, like Jesus, and then there's like 6 different statements. Those are the ethos of the church, our DNA. And so we are going to take advantage of that and celebrate that ethos through the lives of different people from the past. And I get the honor of kicking off this thing. We're going to do 4 of these this year. They're not going to be next to each other. So it's like a series where we kind of got lost and we did a bunch of stuff in between. Then we do another one, then other stuff in between. So it'll all make sense. We are today going to celebrate the life of Martin de Porres. He's going to help us talk through the value of justice is our pursuit. So let me tell you a little bit about his life, just give you a quick overview, and then we'll see how this lends into justice. Officially, he's the patron saint of barbers, hairstylists, innkeepers, Mexico, Peru, black people, people of mixed race, poor people, public education, public health, and television. I kid you not. He is the patron saint of television. Just look it up. Anyhow, unofficially, he represents veterinarians, holistic healers, protection from rats and mice, people who are bullied, and most importantly, Star Trek fans. Because it was said he could travel thousands of miles in a moment, or that he could be in 2 places at once, like Spock's body and Spock's katra, his soul. So anyhow, I'm not joking, this is true. Look it up. Primarily, though, he stands for interracial and social justice and racial harmony, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So Martin was born in Lima, Peru in 1579, and he died in 1639 at the age of 61, the same age as I am. So it's kind of ominous here that I'm 61 preaching about a guy who died at 61. I'm hoping that doesn't happen. Put your guns away, check them at the door. We would appreciate that. Anyhow, he was born out of wedlock. His father was Juan de Porres, who was a Spanish nobleman. He ruled down in Peru and several other places in Central and South Central America and Mexico. And his mother was Ana Velasquez. She was a freed slave. She was half African and half Peruvian. His father, when he was born, his father saw that he was dark-skinned, and he wouldn't acknowledge Martin as his own. He rejected him, and he rejected the mother, and left them to their own devices. Now, being of mixed race, being poor and born out of wedlock was a really bad combination at that time in history. Down in Peru, you were automatically, that was 3 strikes against you. Society was against you. Laws were against you. And so it was a really hard life for them growing up. However, at a young age, he was able to get an apprenticeship as a barber. Now, if you work at a barber nowadays, what do? You cut and groom hair, right? That's not what a barber did back then. That's part of what a barber did. But a barber also prescribed medicine and performed rudimentary surgery. So if you had the pneumonia, you go to the barber. If you cut your finger open, slice your finger off, you go to the barber to get it stitched up again. That's what barbers did. So anyhow, very interesting. But he became pretty good at it. He applied himself diligently as a young teenager, and he's respected for the quality of his work. And it gave him a chance to earn a reasonable amount of money, which after a few years, he started to earn enough money to feed his family. The thing is, Martin had this trait about him. His mom would send him into the marketplace to buy food. And so Martin would go, he'd buy food, meals for his family. But whenever he saw hungry people, he gave them all the food. Do you know somebody like that? He would get home and he would have nothing left. And, his mom was so upset that he didn't obey and, bring the food home. On the other hand, how can you get mad at your kid for caring about hungry people, So Martin, he was very unusual. When he wasn't working, he was going to church. Something in him was drawn to the churches in the area, and he would always stop and participate in the services. And there was a Dominican monastery there, and he decided he wanted to give his life to God and serve as a Dominican. Unfortunately, because of the color of his skin, he was not able to do that. You see, people of African descent or Native American descent were denied the opportunity to serve in the church. Of all places, could not serve in the church. So he was told that he would not be allowed to do that. Nevertheless, he wanted to, he desired to, and he really lived his life by a particular biblical verse, and it's Psalm 84:10. In that verse, it says, "Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked." And throughout the rest of his life, he was known to frequently say, "I just want to be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord. That's all I want. Just let me be a doorkeeper in God's house." So he went and he applied for the opportunity to do that. And he was granted it to serve at the monastery, but not as a member, just as what they call a donato. So after 8 years of full-time service doing that, he gave up his work as a barber. He moved in. They provided food and a bed to sleep on, and then he served. So after 8 years of doing that, the head of the Dominican order invited him to join them, despite the law forbidding him from doing so. Now, Martin was 24 years old at the time, and some in the order weren't real happy about having him in there because he was the wrong skin color and because he was born out of wedlock. These were held against him. And Martin, to be frank, he said, "I don't belong here. I just want to serve. Just let me serve in whatever way I can." But he decided that, there's so much more he could do that was on his heart if he were a lay brother at the monastery. So he went ahead and accepted the offer and became a lay brother, not a full-fledged monk, but a lay brother there at the monastery. So today, I'd like to talk about him. He lived 37 years at the monastery, served God and his brother, and most of all the people of Lima, Peru. So let's talk about his life and what he can show us about social justice. Martin knew that injustice arises whenever one human looks condescendingly upon another. And trust me, he understood the look of condescension. Whenever he walked out the door into the street, faces everywhere looked upon him with condescension because of who he was and his background. He felt that disdain. The thing is, injustice is predicated upon pride. So the greatest weapon we have against injustice is humility. Humility is the cornerstone upon which justice is built. How did humility manifest itself in Martin's life? Well, when Martin first approached the monastery, he requested the humblest job available. Like I said, it was called a donato. A donato was a helper. They served the monastery in exchange for food and housing. They specifically took the most difficult and the most menial of tasks. Despite his special trade skills, Martin did not consider this type of work below himself. It would be like me walking over to McDonald's and asking for a job when I have a whole career of working as an IT professional and even working as an IT director. And yet I'm going to go work at McDonald's. I'm not too proud for that. Martin was not too proud for that. What's telling is how Martin applied himself to this disagreeable work with simplicity and with zeal. In his mind, since he took the humblest position as a helper, it was only logical that he be assigned the dirtiest and most meaningful types of tasks that were available. We learn from Martin that a job is no more lowly than the attitude that we bring to it. Another example of his humility is that over time, God did open the door for him to use his skills as a barber, but he refused to accept payment for that work in the monastery. Instead, he offered his skills freely in the service of others. He never asked for recognition. He never asked for money. All he wanted to do was offer whatever gifts he had to his brothers around him and to the people of the town who came over to the monastery. So he wasn't looking for recognition. He just wanted to serve. A third example of his humility is that his duties brought along with them, this is a quote from the biography I read, a throng of magnificent occasions for the exercise of patience. Think about that. A throng of magnificent occasions. All of you who have kids that are young, like 5, 4, 3, whatever, you have a throng of magnificent occasions to practice patience. Well, so did he. But a lot of it had to do with the attitudes people had toward him. In today's world, we're taught to take offense at the slightest of slights. People everywhere take offense at everything, or so it seems to me. What so-and-so did hurt me. What they said was annoying to me. It was mean. It was inconsiderate of my feelings. And so I'm going to make a big deal out of this. And throughout his life, Martin suffered all manner of vile insults because of his social standing. But instead of railing against the system or hating the perpetrators, he used the insults to practice humility. And it reminds me of a few verses in the Bible. Matthew 23:12 says, "For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." So Martin believed that we should welcome the opportunity to humble ourselves, whatever form that took. Proverbs 17:9 says, "Whoever would foster love covers over an offense, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends." And Proverbs 19:11 says, "A person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense." The Bible encourages us to quickly forgive an offense because it fosters love, it yields patience, and it helps us to develop humility. Now, don't take me wrong here. I'm not saying that we should go out and look to be offended. I'm not saying that we should try to find someone who will insult us. I'm not saying that we should be quiet every time there's emotional maltreatment going on around us. But we just have this tendency in our society to try to want to take offense at everything, every insult, every disrespectful word or action. We want to make a big deal out of it. And that's not a good way to live our lives. We need to find some medium between that and between humbling ourselves and not trying to defend ourselves and just saying, you know what, I know who I am in God. I can let this slide past because I love you and I want to have a relationship with you. A final sign of humility is that Martin welcomed being assigned the lowliest tasks. One author wrote, "It is relatively easy for us to put ourselves in the last place, but rather difficult to submit to being assigned the last place by someone else." He's right, isn't he? It's okay if I want to humble myself and go clean the toilets in this building, right? But don't you assign me to do that. Don't tell me that's my job. Because what does that do? It makes me feel bad. It makes me feel like I'm not worth anything more. I lose my dignity. Martin didn't mind that because it gave him the opportunity to grow in humility. So what are the keys to humility? How do we become more humble people? Martin always viewed himself in comparison to God rather than in comparison to other people. Now, of course, other people tried to lower his vision and look at them and, comment on his social standing and his background without a father and all. But, he just agreed with them, and then he went on and he turned his eyes back up to God. You see, the thing is, when we are focused on God and we are focused on his greatness and his majesty, there's no difference between the rest of us. We are so far below God in terms of all those things that, We're all equal when it comes to that. And so he just looked up and he said, you know what? He's the only one I've got to compare myself to, not to anyone else.
That's good.
So our social status means nothing in the presence of God. In fact, if you remember what I said earlier, it's our social status or our desire for social status that often leads to injustice. It leads us to exalt ourselves over somebody else. Injustice is predicated upon pride, and the greatest weapon for fighting injustice is humility. Humility is the cornerstone upon which the house of justice is built.
That's good.
Second thing we can learn about developing humility is just not taking offense at everything and forgiving quickly, looking to forgive and build relationships instead. So, second point about Martin, if injustice is motivated by pride, what is it that motivates acts of justice? You know, the opposite. What is the force behind them? Is it not love? When we meditate on the love of Jesus, as we see illustrated in the Bible, and when we respond with gratitude, then we feel motivated to pass along that love to other people. So let's talk about some of the stories of Martin's love. And I think there was a lot of stuff that I read, but I'm just going to summarize it in 3 traits that were exemplified by him. First, when Martin approached a person, his serenity and his smiling face comforted them instantly. It seemed that Martin had nothing else in the world to do but give all of his attention to that one person in that moment. Imagine how it feels to be the center of someone else's attention. Don't you feel loved? That was love. Second, in Martin's eyes, a man stricken with illness was much more than a clinical case. He was not simply fighting a physical battle, but he was also fighting an emotional and a spiritual battle, a struggle that might have long-lasting repercussions on his life. And so Martin saw the whole person. He understood this is more than just one thing. It's his whole life that's being affected by this. He loved them. He made sure they knew they were fully seen and fully known, and he addressed the whole person when he practiced healing. Third, he gave of himself without limits. He did whatever was needed to get the job done. It wasn't good enough if he could feed 99 out of 100 hungry people. To him, that was, catastrophic loss. We have to take care of every single person in need. He was the kind of person that he didn't pray to God and then walk away and say, well, I did whatever I could. I did my best. He took his prayers to God. He went to God with the intention of, you will provide for these people. And I am going to do whatever it takes. It's a different mindset. Do you see that? It's one thing to say, well, I did everything I could have done. I guess we'll just move on. It's another mindset to say, I am not letting go until we can resolve this issue and help this person in need. That was love coming out of his heart. So what are the keys to love? How do we develop love? Well, we know that Martin spent a lot of time meditating upon God when he was, learning humility. Well, the same thing happened. He meditated on the love of God for him personally. And he allowed that to influence him. He allowed gratitude to come up out of his heart. And through that gratitude, he was able to overflow to other people. It came out of his heart. It was also the kind of thing that gave him the patience of putting up with difficult people. When people are insulting you, and he worked in the infirmary, when he worked in the infirmary and people are angry, they're in pain and stuff, and they're just going crazy, that love gave him the patience to continue to care for those people in their time of need. So meditating upon God's sacrificial love. Also, things like love don't just happen. You have to practice them. It takes effort. It takes time. And so you have to push yourself. You have to make it a habit, a daily habit to love whoever comes across your path. And so that was something he did. Everybody. He stopped and took time for them. All right. Third area. We talked about how humility is the foundation for justice, and we talked about how love motivates acts of justice. Now I'd like to talk about how acts of justice restore us to the kind of people that God made us to be. You see, biblical justice is not simply about obtaining equal outcomes for everyone, no matter how we want to define equal. Instead, biblical justice is about restoring everyone to their proper standing before God and one another, ascribing equal dignity to all people, equal authority in governing creation and governing society, and equal opportunity for everybody to come forward and bless others. So, how did he practice this? What are some stories here? Well, I got quite a few of them, so bear with me. But I think it was worthwhile because when I was reading what people wrote about him, and all these stories, all these examples come from just a few years after he died, I was just so inspired by his life. And I'm reading the book and I'm just thinking, I'm not worthy to talk about this guy. But the thing is, if we don't talk about people like this, we need to talk about what does a life worth living really look like. We live in a society that's so focused on getting what we want and taking care of our needs and making ourselves happy. And depression is everywhere. Anger and bitterness is everywhere. What does a life worth living look like? We have to talk about these people and hold them up as an examples. And so I was deeply inspired by Martine's life. I mentioned Martine ran the infirmary at the monastery. He extended care well beyond the people who lived in the monastery to the community around him, opened the doors to any and everyone he found. And physical and emotional healing were both part of it. Like I said, he saw the whole person, so he focused on all aspects of their life when they came in for physical healing. And he was combating, the repercussions of sin in this world. Furthermore, he took it upon himself to provide the supplies for the infirmary, either out of his own money that he might have received somehow, or he went out and he planted a garden for medicinal supplies so he wouldn't have to buy those kind of things, and maintained a garden to do that. So he made practical provisions so that he could complete his ministry and help people. And although he participated in many miraculous healings, one of the things that really stood out to me was how he didn't neglect the ordinary remedies. What do I mean by that? He was not trying to make a big deal out of the healings. He figured if a practical remedy would solve the problem, then why do you have to do something miraculous? God's already given us the answer for how to deal with this. Let's just deal with it that way. He had one guy come up who was having a really hard time sleeping. And he had gone many days without sleeping. And Martine said, well, why don't you just move your bed closer to the door so you're not next to the cold air? And you know what? It worked. He was able to sleep. And what do we want? We want a pill, right? Or we want someone to pray over us and stuff. And he prayed over everybody, don't get me wrong. But he just didn't make a big deal out of it. He was naturally supernatural, in John Wimber's words. And he wanted to, he didn't want people to look to him as some miraculous person. He just wanted to do his thing. And for all of us who have trades and gifts that we think, this isn't, this is just me. It's nothing godly here. It is godly. Yeah. God works through the natural so many times, but we combine it with the supernatural. We pray and we offer our gifts together in order to accomplish a goal, a purpose. And Martine did that.
That's good.
What's more, he not only housed sick people in the infirmary, but he didn't allow them to leave the infirmary until he had found satisfactory work for them. No, they were not slaves. We're not talking Jack Nicholson and, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest here. We're talking about he didn't let people leave until they could provide for themselves. It was a holistic thing. There was no free lunch in that sense. He wanted people to be healed, but he also wanted them to be able to provide for themselves and provide for other people, because that's what it means to be a human being, right? To care for everybody. And so he made it possible for them to do that through teaching them trades or hooking them up with people who could provide them a trade when they left. Martine, beyond the healing, he was also renowned for feeding the hungry. Now, part of God's plan is that all people should experience blessing, and that includes food and shelter with that. Martine treated all of those in need with the same dignity, regardless of their social standing. It didn't matter whether they were Spaniards or blacks or Peruvian Indians, whether they were mixed race, whether they were sick or well. he took care of everybody's needs. And the thing is, there were so many people coming to the monastery for food, they said it would have taken a truckload to feed all these people. They never had that much food there, and yet somehow God did a miracle every single day and provided for the people who came, and nobody went away hungry. Of course, Martin wouldn't have allowed that, the 99 and the 1, but God did a miracle right there. And something else that inspired me was Martin was never dismayed by the large number of poor people who were coming. In fact, it was like he was at home. When the poor people came, he was most comfortable, most relaxed, just sitting amongst them, milling around with them. And it reminded me of the Sermon on the Mount and Jesus in the Beatitudes, and Jesus talked about the humble. Martin was at home with the humble, and I just pray that all of us would feel at home with the humble in society. Not feel like they're dirty or we need to, they're uncouth, they don't know how to, speak right or treat people right or behave properly. That is our home, is among the humble in society. There was a detachment of soldiers for whom no one provided. And you got to remember, at this time, the soldiers had conquered Peru. They weren't exactly welcome, in polite company amongst the natives. But Martin thought it was wrong to leave them starving. And so he made sure for several months he took them food daily to make sure they had provisions. Another category of hungry were the Europeans, who had once been rich, but then lost everything due to some kind of a misfortune. They were extremely proud, and they did not want to ask for food, let alone from, a mixed race person like Martin. But you know what? He didn't care. He was going to provide for them anyway, and he wasn't going to rub it in that they had to be dependent on him. So what he did was he provisioned the food and the supplies, but then he gave them to other Europeans to give to the ones in need. And I was really impressed by that. It wasn't about him getting back at them for anything. He didn't want to humiliate the people he served. And sometimes we humiliate the people we serve just by the way we do things. He wasn't that kind of a person. He just wanted to bless them whether he got any credit for it or not. And I find that inspiring. Another category of the needy whom he helped, raised up, gave them dignity were those in prison. Now, he did bring food and clothing to those in prison, but he also sought to help restore them from the sin that had left them in prison to begin with. Whatever it is they'd done, he wanted to work with their soul and their spirit so that they could change. And no matter what mistakes they'd made in life, Martin wanted to show them that their life had innate value and that they could be restored to meaningful contributors in society. This idea of justice. It's about restoration, bringing people back to what they were created to be. In addition to prisoners, Martin frequently brought into the monastery criminals who were wanted by the police. Yeah. He's a saint. How many of you are going to be hiding criminals? Actually, what we call crime sometimes is a crime itself, to be honest. And so that's what he saw. Anyhow, brought in people who were wanted by the police. He found people lying in the street, wounded, from brawls and fights and stuff. And a few of these people were almost always to be found with him. He would always bring them back to the monastery with him. And he provided the finest accommodations he could, even better than what he slept in. He provided good food to help nourish them and, again, help restore their lives. Now, this got out of hand. At least some of the brothers at the monastery thought this was getting out of hand. And so they went to the head of the monastery and said, look, you got to put an end to this. We can't have these kind of people coming in here and spending time with us. This is dangerous. And so the head of the monastery made a rule and said, you know what? No more. We're done with this. And Martin tried to comply. It was kind of a half-hearted thing, But then he saw a Peruvian guy laying on the street one night as he was coming back, been beaten up. And he decided, you know what? I'm taking him with me. And so he brought him into the monastery. He fed him, made sure he had some good clothes, took care of his wounds. And word got out, obviously, that Martin had done this. So the head of the monastery calls in Martin to give an account for himself. And Martin said that he had judged that the precept of love took precedence over the precept of obedience. The precept of love takes precedence over obedience. The head of the monastery was stunned, and he relented of his rule. He decided Martin was right. Love does take precedence over obedience in the Bible. And so Martin resumed inviting the destitute and the criminals and whoever into the monastery with him, taking care of them and helping to restore their lives to be a meaningful contributor to society. I think sometimes in our society, we tend to prioritize punishment over restoration. God does not prioritize punishment over restoration. God is about redeeming and restoring broken lives. And that has to be our business too. Yes. Redeeming and restoring the broken. One particular group that called out to Martin's charity in a special way was the abandoned children and orphans. Martin started an orphanage without any outside support. He just did it because he saw the need. And it wasn't enough for him just to give them a place to sleep and food to eat. He also wanted to give them an education because why? Because he wanted to create an opportunity for them to provide for themselves when they left the orphanage and to provide for others. So he did that. He didn't just focus on the immediate needs. He looked at the human and said, this is a person, what could they be? And then he helped them to become that. It reminds me of something else that we do. What's that? Asia's Hope. We help with the children in Cambodia and in India in the same way. Martin also devoted himself passionately to taking care of others. It mattered little to him whether or not his patients were gifted with reason. So, he opened a veterinary clinic. And he took care of the animals who needed it out in the countryside. His sister had a home there. And he also opened a shelter in the city for stray cats and dogs. They're God's creatures, right? Centuries ahead of his time, the barber turned veterinarian treated sick and injured animals at these two facilities. And he's still remembered to this day. You will find veterinary clinics named after him. I actually looked up online to see, and there are a number of them. All right, so remember, what's the key to justice? Remember, humility causes us to see all people with equal dignity, authority, and opportunity to serve others. Love strengthens us to persevere and to go beyond ourselves in loving others. And the desire to restore people so that they too might know God as he did and set guidelines for how he practiced justice. And I think you're already getting a hint by many of the examples I gave. It was always with the goal of ascribing equal dignity, authority, and opportunity to bless others. It was a restorative justice, restoring people. It wasn't just anything. And that's why, today we hear a lot about equating outcomes or eliminating disproportionality. There are times when those things might be important, but let's not confuse that with biblical justice. Biblical justice restores people to be who God created them to be, and it's to see the best in other people. And so we can't always control outcomes, That's kind of a macro society level, but every single one of you in this room can control how you treat people and how you elevate people and give them dignity when they don't feel dignity even for themselves. All of us can do that. So all of us can practice justice in our daily lives. Martin wanted to awaken the love of God in people, in all people, without exception. The rich as well as the poor. Some people do not know how to love the poor without hating the rich. Martin was not that person. He loved all. In his eyes, the rich and the poor are not two irreconcilable opposites. They're just two ways of living. In the diversity of this world, there are two ways of living, and all of us can love one another. All of us can practice justice towards one another. At Life Church, we say that justice is our pursuit. What has Martin taught us about pursuing justice? First, it means that humility has to be our pursuit. We meditate on the greatness of God. And in doing so, we realize that the differences between us are petty and insignificant. We're all the same when compared to his greatness. And we're slow to take offense at one another because we want to build relationships with one another. Second, it means that love is also our pursuit. We meditate on the gracious love of God for us, and then we give that away to other people. And we practice love daily, because you have to practice daily if you're ever going to get good at it. Third, we practice restorative acts of justice. We want to restore people to what God created them to be. We want to help everyone to be contributors to the welfare of others. It's not enough to receive. We all have to learn how we can give to other people and help care for someone else. This is how we make justice our pursuit in both attitude and action. And I want to remind you of something. Remember, Martin came from nothing. He was on the bottom rung of society. People disdained him. There were laws blocking him, preventing him from even serving God. And yet he pressed through. He gave. There's no one in this room that has an excuse for not practicing justice in this world. Not a one of us. Martin's a great example of that. We are going to take communion. And we have communion set up on the right and left here and in the back center. And communion is an opportunity to reflect on that. We are all one. We are all the same. And we are all serving and doing justly to one another. And we can be grateful for the sacrifice of Jesus. And as we express that gratitude for his love for us, we can love one another, the people around you. So we're going to do that. And as we do it, we're going to take, there's little pieces of gluten-free bread. We're going to dip it in. And eat it. Give thanks to God as you do that. You can come forward and go ahead and take communion.
Than I am right now. Wasn't holding you up, so there's nothing I can do to let you down. It doesn't take a trophy to make you proud. I'll never be more loved than I am right now. Going through a storm, but I won't go down. I hear your voice carried in the rhythm of the wind to call me out. You would cross an ocean so I wouldn't drown. You've never been closer than you are right now. So we sing, you are Jireh, you are enough. You are Jireh. And I will be content with every circumstance, 'cause you are Jireh, you are enough, oh, forever enough. You're always enough, God, you're more than enough. And forever enough, you're always enough, God, you're more than enough. I don't wanna forget how I feel right now on the mountaintop. Oh, I can see so clear what it's all about. So stay by my side where the sun goes down. I don't want to forget how I feel right now. So we sing Jireh, you are enough. You are
In closing, I would like us to commit ourselves to acts of justice. And so I've got some scriptures I'd like us to read together. We're going to put them up here on the screen. Jesse, if we could skip over the Genesis passage and go down to the second one. Yes, that one right there. All right, so we're just going to read these together. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 passages. We're going to read these together, and this is our own prayer and our own commitment to God. So, read along with me. Then God said, wrong one. In the same way, all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Speak up, next one. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. And then our final passage, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. At this church, some of you are newer, we have a lot of opportunities to serve. And out here on the side, in our information area, there's a Life to See Bus card. We often talk about Asia's Hope. We often talk about Center of Hope. And those are ways that you can contribute to helping those who are in need and helping to raise them up and give them an opportunity to be the man and woman that God created them to be. But Life to See Bus also has other opportunities. There's probably, a dozen or so. Aaron's here. Aaron, would you stand up and just wave your hand? Aaron's in charge of this, and Aaron can hook you up. So if you're not involved in some way, there are opportunities. And if God has spoken to you, then I want you to seek out Aaron, or if you have some other opportunity, that's great too. But seek out Aaron, and he can get you hooked up with something, okay? I want to just remember today the life of Martin de Porres. He's been an inspiration to me. I hope I've shared something that's been an inspiration to you. And as we commemorate this feast day, we are commemorating his life and honoring his memory. Going to release you. We have a chili cook-off. Is there something that needs to be said about that? Did you have? Yeah, you can come on up.
Hey, real quick. If you're doing the chili cook-off, I'm sorry, that was a weird switch. If you're doing the chili cook-off, out those doors, the further ones towards the back parking lot, you can pay right there as you're coming in. If you submitted chili, you don't have to pay. But if you're not, then the table's right there. They'll give you your bowls. They'll explain to you how voting works and things like that. That's all.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. All right. Bless you. Let's go eat some chili.